The charity gala at the Grand Meridian Hotel was supposed to be a night of celebration. Military families, decorated officers, and wealthy donors mingled in the opulent ballroom, their conversations mixing with the gentle melody of string quartet. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables laden with expensive china and fresh flowers. Everyone was dressed in their finest attire, the men in dress uniforms or elegant tuxedos, the women in flowing evening gowns. Sarah Martinez stood near the silent auction display, her navy blue dress modest but elegant. As a military spouse and volunteer coordinator for the Navy Family Support Center, she had worked tirelessly to organize this event. The proceeds would help families of deployed sailors manage their expenses and provide emergency assistance to those in need. Sarah's husband, Lieutenant Commander David Martinez, was currently deployed in the Pacific, leaving her to navigate these social events alone. She was examining a donated painting when she noticed Admiral Richard Blackwood approaching. The man commanded respect wherever he went, his chest heavy with ribbons and medals that told stories of a distinguished career. His gray hair was perfectly groomed, and his dress whites were immaculate. However, Sarah had heard whispers about the Admiral that made her uncomfortable. Other military wives had quietly shared stories about his inappropriate comments and unwelcome advances at various functions. Mrs. Martinez, Admiral Blackwood said, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I must say, you look absolutely stunning tonight." Sarah offered a polite smile, keeping her distance. "Thank you, Admiral. I hope you're enjoying the evening. We've raised quite a bit for the families." The Admiral stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with the scent of alcohol on his breath. "You know, with your husband deployed for months at a time, you must get quite lonely. A beautiful woman like you shouldn't have to spend her evenings alone." The comment made Sarah's skin crawl, but she maintained her composure. Years of being a military wife had taught her to navigate difficult situations diplomatically. "I stay quite busy with volunteer work and community activities, Admiral. There's always plenty to do." Admiral Blackwood's smile turned predatory. "I'm sure there is. Perhaps you'd like to join me for dinner sometime this week? I know, a lovely little place downtown, very private and intimate." Sarah's discomfort grew, but she kept her voice steady and professional. "That's very kind of you to offer, Admiral, but I don't think that would be appropriate. My husband and I have a very strong marriage." The Admiral's expression darkened slightly. He wasn't used to being refused, especially by the wife of a junior officer. "Come now, Sarah. May I call you Sarah? Your husband is thousands of miles away. What he doesn't know won't hurt him. Besides, it could be beneficial for his career to have his wife be friendly with senior officers." The threat was barely veiled, and Sarah felt her anger rising. This man was essentially suggesting she prostitute herself for her husband's advancement. It was disgusting and insulting on every level. "Admiral Blackwood, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm here as a volunteer and organizer, nothing more. I'm not interested in any kind of personal relationship." Across the room, Master Chief Petty Officer Jake Reaper Thompson was nursing a glass of club soda and watching the crowd. The Navy SEAL was attending the gala at the request of his commanding officer, though formal events weren't exactly his comfort zone. He'd rather be in the field or training with his team than making small talk in a tuxedo. His dark hair was shorter than regulation length, and despite the formal wear, there was something about his posture and awareness that marked him as a warrior. Jake had been watching Admiral Blackwood's interaction with the woman in the Navy dress, and he didn't like what he was seeing. The body language was all wrong. The Admiral was invading her personal space, and the woman was clearly uncomfortable, though she was handling herself with admirable grace. Jake's instincts, honed by years of combat and dangerous missions, told him the situation was escalating. Back at the auction display, Admiral Blackwood was growing more aggressive. The alcohol he'd consumed throughout the evening was lowering his inhibitions and amplifying his sense of entitlement. "Listen to me carefully, Mrs. Martinez. I'm offering you an opportunity here. Your husband's next fitness report could be very favorable, or it could highlight some areas where he needs improvement. The choice is yours. Sarah's face flushed with anger. The Admiral was now openly threatening her husband's career unless she agreed to his advances. It was sexual harassment and abuse of power at its worst. Admiral, what you're suggesting is completely inappropriate and unprofessional. I think this conversation needs to end now. She started to walk away, but Admiral Blackwood grabbed her arm, his grip firm enough to leave marks. Don't you dare walk away from me when I'm talking to you. You need to learn some respect for senior officers. Sarah tried to pull her arm free, but his grip tightened. Let go of me, Admiral. You're hurting me. I'll let go when you agree to have dinner with me this week. It's a simple request, Sarah. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. Other guests were starting to notice the commotion, though from a distance it might have looked like a normal conversation. Sarah's voice remained steady despite her growing fear and anger. What you're doing is wrong, Admiral. This is sexual harassment, and you're abusing your position of authority. My husband serves this country with honor, and he doesn't deserve to have his career threatened because his wife won't sleep with his superior officer. The words hit Admiral Blackwood like a physical blow. His face turned red with rage and embarrassment. How dare this woman, the wife of a junior officer, speak to him this way? In his alcohol-impaired judgment, he saw her refusal and accusations as insubordination that needed to be corrected immediately. Without warning, Admiral Blackwood's free hand came across Sarah's face in a vicious backhand slap. The sound echoed through the immediate area like a gunshot. Sarah's head snapped to the side from the force of the blow, and she stumbled backward, her hand flying to her cheek where a red welt was already forming. The ballroom seemed to freeze for a moment. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as people turned to see what had caused the commotion. Sarah stood there in shock, her eyes filling with tears from both the pain and the humiliation. She couldn't believe that a senior naval officer had just struck her at a charity event in front of dozens of witnesses. Admiral Blackwood, realizing what he had done but still consumed by rage and alcohol, pointed his finger at Sarah. That's what happens when you show disrespect to your betters. Maybe that will teach you some manners. What the Admiral didn't see was the figure moving through the crowd with deadly purpose. Master Chief Jake Thompson had witnessed the entire exchange, and when he saw the Admiral strike Sarah, something primal and protective awakened inside him. Years of training and combat experience took over, and he moved through the shocked guests like a shadow, his eyes locked on his target. The Admiral was still pointing at Sarah, his mouth open to deliver another verbal assault, when Jake reached him. There was no warning, no dramatic announcement. Jake's hand clamped down on the Admiral's shoulder like a steel trap, spinning him around with such force that the older man nearly lost his footing. "Sir," Jake said, his voice low and deadly calm, "I think you need to step outside." Admiral Blackwood spun around to face the man who had dared to touch him. His face was still flushed from alcohol and anger, and he was ready to unleash his fury on whoever had interrupted his confrontation with Sarah. When he saw the Navy SEAL standing before him, his initial reaction was one of outrage mixed with disbelief. "Do you know who I am?" Admiral Blackwood snarled, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "I'm an admiral in the United States Navy, and you just put your hands on a superior officer. That's assault on a senior officer, sailor." Jake's expression remained completely calm, though his dark eyes held a coldness that made several nearby guests unconsciously step backward. His voice was quiet but carried with absolute authority. "Yes, sir, I know exactly who you are. I also know what you just did to that woman. I saw the whole thing." The Admiral glanced around the ballroom, suddenly aware that dozens of eyes were on them. Many of the guests were holding up their phones, recording the confrontation. Society wives, business leaders, and other military officers were all witnesses to what was unfolding. His mind, still clouded by alcohol, struggled to process the implications. "What I do is none of her business, sailor. That woman was disrespectful, and she needed to be corrected. Sometimes civilians need to learn their place." Sarah was still standing nearby, her hand pressed to her cheek where the Admiral had struck her. The red mark was clearly visible, and Tears of anger and humiliation streamed down her face. Several other military wives had moved to her side, offering comfort and support. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his voice remained controlled. "Sir, that woman is a military spouse who was volunteering her time to help Navy families. She didn't deserve to be harassed, threatened, or assaulted. What you did was wrong on every level." Admiral Blackwood's face turned an even deeper shade of red. The alcohol and his inflated sense of authority made him incapable of backing down, even though every rational part of his mind should have been telling him to defuse the situation. "I don't take lectures from enlisted men, especially not from some special forces prima donna who thinks his training makes him better than everyone else." The Admiral stepped closer to Jake, trying to use his height and rank to intimidate the SEAL. "You want to know what's going to happen here, Master Chief? You're going to apologize to me in front of all these people, and then you're going to walk away. If you're very lucky, I might not have you court-martialed for laying hands on a superior officer." Jake didn't move a muscle. He'd faced down terrorists, enemy soldiers, and dangerous criminals without flinching, and a drunk admiral wasn't going to intimidate him. "Sir, I think you should consider your next words very carefully. Everyone here saw you strike Mrs. Martinez. They heard you threaten her husband's career unless she agreed to your advances. There are dozens of witnesses and probably video evidence already spreading on social media." The Admiral looked around again, his alcohol-impaired mind finally starting to grasp the severity of his situation. But instead of backing down, his narcissistic personality and years of unchecked authority made him double down on his aggressive stance. "I don't care who's watching," Admiral Blackwood declared, his voice echoing through the ballroom. "I've served this country for over 30 years. I've earned the right to be treated with respect, and I won't be lectured by some muscled-up enlisted man who thinks he's a hero because he can shoot people in the dark." The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Jake had lost friends in combat, had seen good sailors die serving their country, and had sacrificed more for the Navy than this pompous officer could ever understand. The Admiral's words weren't just an attack on him personally, but on every service member who had made the ultimate sacrifice. Sarah, despite her own trauma, found her voice. "Admiral, please stop. You're making this worse for yourself. Just apologize and walk away." Admiral Blackwood turned his attention back to Sarah, his face twisted with rage. "You should keep your mouth shut, woman. You've caused enough trouble for one evening. Maybe I should call your husband and let him know how his wife behaves at formal functions." That was the breaking point for Jake. The Admiral had just threatened to destroy an innocent woman's marriage as revenge for his own misconduct. The protective instinct that had made Jake an elite warrior surged through him, and he made a decision that would change everything. "Sir," Jake said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge, "I'm going to give you one chance to apologize to Mrs. Martinez and leave this event quietly. Take it." Admiral Blackwood laughed, a harsh sound that grated against everyone's nerves. "Or what, sailor? What exactly are you going to do? You think your special forces training gives you the right to threaten a flag officer? I could have you thrown in the brig for the next 10 years. The Admiral reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. "Matter of fact, I'm going to call base security right now and have you arrested. Then we'll see how tough you are when you're sitting in a cell." As the Admiral started to dial, Jake's training kicked in. He could see that this man was beyond reason, that he was going to continue to abuse his power and hurt innocent people unless someone stopped him. In combat zones, Jake had learned to make split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. This situation required the same kind of decisive action. Moving faster than most people could follow, Jake stepped forward and grabbed the Admiral's wrist, applying pressure to a specific nerve point that he'd learned in hand-to-hand combat training. The Admiral's phone clattered to the floor as his fingers went numb, and he cried out in pain. "Sir," Jake said quietly, his face now inches from the Admiral's, "you need to listen very carefully. You're going to apologize to Mrs. Martinez. You're going to leave this event immediately, and you're going to pray that she doesn't press charges for assault and sexual harassment. Admiral Blackwood tried to pull his wrist free, but Jake's grip was like iron. The pain was excruciating, and for the first time that evening, fear began to creep into the Admiral's consciousness. He was starting to realize that he had pushed the wrong man too far. "Let go of me," the Admiral gasped, his voice strained with pain. "You're assaulting a superior officer. This is mutiny." Jake's grip tightened slightly, sending fresh waves of agony up the Admiral's arm. "Sir, what I'm doing is protecting an innocent woman from a predator who happens to wear the same uniform I do. The fact that you outrank me doesn't give you the right to abuse women or threaten people's careers for your own gratification." The ballroom was completely silent now, except for the Admiral's labored breathing and the soft sound of cell phone cameras recording every moment. Everyone present understood they were witnessing something extraordinary, a moment when military justice was being administered outside the normal chain of command. Sarah found the courage to speak again, her voice stronger now. "Admiral Blackwood, you hit me because I wouldn't agree to have an affair with you. You threatened my husband's career because I refused your advances. That's not military leadership. That's criminal behavior." The Admiral looked around the room one more time, finally seeing the disgust and condemnation in every face staring back at him. His career, his reputation, everything he had built over 30 years was crumbling around him because he couldn't control his worst impulses. The pressure on Admiral Blackwood's wrist was becoming unbearable, and he could feel his knees beginning to buckle from the pain. Jake's knowledge of nerve points and pressure techniques was precise and devastating. The SEAL had been trained to incapacitate enemies quickly and efficiently, and those skills were now being applied to a corrupt officer who had forgotten his oath to serve and protect. Okay, Admiral Blackwood gasped, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning in the ballroom. "Just let go, please." Jake maintained his grip for another few seconds, making sure the Admiral understood that he was completely at the mercy of someone he had tried to intimidate. When he finally released the man's wrist, Admiral Blackwood stumbled backward, cradling his injured arm against his chest. "Your apologies, sir," Jake said firmly, his eyes never leaving the Admiral's face. "To Mrs. Martinez." Now, the Admiral looked around the ballroom one more time, seeing the sea of judgmental faces staring back at him. Every phone camera was pointed in his direction, and he knew that videos of this incident would be circulating on social media within minutes. His military career was effectively over, but he could still minimize the legal consequences if he handled this correctly. Sarah stepped forward slightly, her posture straightening despite the trauma she had endured. The red handprint on her cheek was even more visible now, a stark reminder of the Admiral's assault. She deserved to hear an acknowledgement of the wrong that had been done to her. "Mrs. Martinez," Admiral Blackwood began, his voice shaky and subdued. I apologize for my behavior tonight. What I did was inappropriate and unprofessional. I had no right to touch you or make threats about your husband's career." The apology felt hollow and forced, but it was better than nothing. Sarah nodded slightly, her dignity intact despite everything she had been through. "Thank you, Admiral. I hope this serves as a reminder that military spouses deserve to be treated with respect, regardless of our husband's rank." Jake continued to watch the Admiral carefully, ready to intervene again if necessary. "Sir, I think it's time for you to leave this event. Mrs. Martinez and her volunteers have worked hard to organize this fundraiser for military families, and you've disrupted it enough." Admiral Blackwood nodded weakly, still cradling his wrist. The fight had gone out of him completely, replaced by the growing realization of what his actions would cost him. As he started to walk toward the exit, several other officers and their wives stepped aside to let him pass, their faces showing a mixture of disgust and disappointment. Just before he reached the ballroom doors, Admiral Blackwood turned back toward Jake. There was something desperate in his eyes, a last-ditch attempt to salvage some shred of authority. "Master Chief Thompson, this isn't over. You assaulted a superior officer in front of witnesses. There will be consequences." Jake's expression didn't change. "Sir, I defended a military spouse from assault and sexual harassment. Every person in this room witnessed your actions, and I'm confident that any investigation will support that conclusion." The Admiral opened his mouth to respond, but Captain Michael Rodriguez, the base commanding officer, had arrived after hearing reports of a disturbance at the charity event. Captain Rodriguez was a respected officer known for his integrity and fair leadership. He had served with distinction in multiple deployments and commanded the respect of everyone under his command. "Admiral Blackwood," Captain Rodriguez said, his voice carrying the authority of command, "I think you should come with me. We need to discuss what happened here tonight." The Admiral looked at Captain Rodriguez with something approaching relief. Perhaps his fellow officer would understand the situation better than these civilians and enlisted personnel. "Captain, thank you for coming. This Master Chief has assaulted me and needs to be placed under arrest immediately." Captain Rodriguez looked around the ballroom, taking in the scene. He saw Sarah with the handprint still visible on her cheek, surrounded by concerned military wives. He saw Jake standing calmly, but alert, clearly ready for further confrontation if necessary. He saw dozens of witnesses with their phones out, all of whom had obviously recorded the entire incident. "Admiral," Captain Rodriguez said carefully, "from what I've been told, Master Chief Thompson was responding to your assault on Mrs. Martinez. Is that correct?" Admiral Blackwood's face reddened again. That woman was disrespectful and needed to be corrected. Sometimes civilians need to learn their place in the military hierarchy. The statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Captain Rodriguez's expression darkened. "Admiral, Mrs. Martinez is a military spouse and volunteer who has given countless hours to support Navy families. Are you telling me that you struck her because you felt she was being disrespectful? She refused a simple dinner invitation and then had the audacity to accuse me of harassment," Admiral Blackwood said, his voice rising again. "I've served this country for over 30 years, and I won't be lectured by the wife of some junior officer." Captain Rodriguez exchanged glances with Jake, and both men understood that Admiral Blackwood was digging his own grave with every word he spoke. The Admiral was essentially confessing to assault and sexual harassment in front of dozens of witnesses. Sarah found her voice again, speaking directly to Captain Rodriguez. "Captain, Admiral Blackwood propositioned me, threatened my husband's career when I refused, and then struck me when I called his behavior inappropriate. Master Chief Thompson intervened to protect me when no one else could or would." Captain Rodriguez nodded gravely. "Mrs. Martinez, I apologize on behalf of the Navy for what you've endured tonight. This behavior is completely contrary to our core values and will be addressed through the appropriate channels." He turned back to Admiral Blackwood, his voice taking on an official tone. "Admiral, you're relieved of your current duties pending a full investigation into tonight's events. I'm recommending that you seek legal counsel immediately." Admiral Blackwood's face went white as the full implications hit him. "Captain, you can't relieve a flag officer based on the word of some enlisted man and a civilian woman." "I can and I will," Captain Rodriguez replied firmly. "What's more, I have dozens of witnesses and video evidence to support this decision. Admiral, your conduct tonight has brought disgrace to the uniform and violated the trust placed in you as a senior officer." Jake stepped forward slightly. "Captain Rodriguez, sir, I take full responsibility for my actions tonight. I used physical force against a superior officer, and I'm prepared to face the consequences of that decision." Captain Rodriguez studied Jake for a moment, seeing the integrity and courage that had made him an elite warrior. "Master Chief Thompson, from what I've observed and been told, you acted to protect a military spouse from assault. Your actions tonight reflect the best traditions of the Navy and the SEAL community." The captain looked around the ballroom, addressing the crowd of witnesses. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to your evening. Mrs. Martinez and her team have organized a wonderful event to support our military families, and I hope we can refocus our attention on that worthy cause." As if released from a spell, the crowd began to murmur among themselves, and some people even started to applaud. They were applauding Jake for his courage in standing up to corruption, applauding Sarah for her dignity in the face of assault, and showing their support for the values of the military was supposed to represent. Admiral Blackwood looked around the room one final time, seeing nothing but condemnation and disappointment in every face. His career was over, his reputation destroyed, and he would likely face criminal charges for his actions. All because he couldn't control his worst impulses and respect the dignity of a military spouse. As Captain Rodriguez escorted Admiral Blackwood from the ballroom, Jake turned his attention to Sarah. The woman had shown incredible strength and grace under pressure, and she deserved to know that her courage hadn't gone unnoticed. As the ballroom slowly returned to some semblance of normalcy, Jake approached Sarah, who was still surrounded by a protective circle of military wives and volunteers. The red mark on her cheek had darkened to a deep bruise, a visible reminder of Admiral Blackwood's assault. Despite her trauma, she was trying to reassure the other women that she was all right. "Ma'am," Jake said quietly, his voice gentle in stark contrast to the deadly calm he had displayed during the confrontation. "Are you okay? Do you need medical attention?" Sarah looked up at him, and for the first time that evening, she managed a genuine smile. "I'm fine, thanks to you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in when you did." "You were handling yourself admirably," Jake replied. "You showed real courage standing up to him, especially knowing he could retaliate against your husband's career. That took guts." Mrs. Patricia Williams, the wife of a senior enlisted sailor and one of Sarah's closest friends in the volunteer community, spoke up. "Sarah, honey, you need to press charges. What that man did was criminal, and he can't be allowed to get away with it just because he wears stars on his collar." Several other women nodded in agreement, their faces showing a mixture of anger and determination. These military spouses had seen too many instances of abuse of power go unpunished, and they were ready to support Sarah in seeking justice. Sarah touched her bruised cheek gingerly. "I know you're right, but I'm worried about David's career. Even if Admiral Blackwood is punished, there might be other senior officers who see me as a troublemaker. The military can be unforgiving to those who make waves." Jake understood her concern better than most. He had seen good sailors suffer retaliation for reporting misconduct by their superiors. The military's emphasis on hierarchy and obedience sometimes protected those who abused their power. However, this situation was different because of the public nature of the incident and the clear evidence of wrongdoing. "Mrs. Martinez," Jake said, "I understand your concerns about retaliation, but you have something most victims don't have. You have witnesses, video evidence, and the support of Captain Rodriguez. Admiral Blackwood's career is already over because of what he did tonight. The question now is whether he faces appropriate consequences for assaulting you." Dr. Rebecca Santos, a military psychologist who had been attending the gala, joined their conversation. She had been watching the situation unfold with professional concern. "Sarah, I want you to know that what you experienced tonight was traumatic, and it's normal to feel confused or conflicted about how to proceed. Sexual harassment and assault can have lasting psychological effects, especially when perpetrated by someone in a position of authority." The doctor handed Sarah her business card. "I specialize in helping military families deal with trauma and abuse. Whether you decide to press charges or not, I think it would be beneficial for you to talk to someone about what happened tonight." Sarah nodded, accepting the card gratefully. "Thank you, Dr. Santos. I think I would like that." Meanwhile, across the room, Captain Rodriguez was dealing with the aftermath of the incident. He had contacted base security, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, and his superiors to report what had occurred. Admiral Blackwood had been escorted to base security to await the arrival of NCIS investigators. The captain approached Jake, who was still staying close to Sarah and the other military spouses. "Master Chief Thompson, I need to speak with you about tonight's events. NCIS will want to interview you as both a witness and a participant in the physical altercation." Jake nodded. "Understood, sir. I'm prepared to give a full statement about everything I witnessed and my actions in response." I want you to know that from my preliminary assessment, your actions were justified and appropriate, Captain Rodriguez said. You protected a military spouse from assault when others couldn't or wouldn't act. That's exactly the kind of courage and integrity we expect from our SEALs. The captain paused, looking around the ballroom where the charity event was slowly getting back on track. However, I want you to understand that there will be an investigation, and Admiral Blackwood may try to claim that you used excessive force or acted outside your authority. Are you prepared for that? Jake's expression remained steady. Sir, I'm prepared for whatever comes. What Admiral Blackwood did was wrong, and I'd do the same thing again if faced with the same situation. Military spouses deserve our protection, not our abuse. Over the next hour, NCIS investigators arrived and began conducting preliminary interviews with witnesses. The ballroom was gradually cleared of everyone except those directly involved in the incident. Sarah gave her statement with remarkable composure, detailing everything from Admiral Blackwood's initial inappropriate comments to his assault and threats. Special Agent Lisa Chun, the lead NCIS investigator, was impressed by the clarity and consistency of the witness statements. Mrs. Martinez, I want to assure you that we take these allegations very seriously. Sexual harassment and assault by military personnel, especially senior officers, will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of both military and civilian law. Agent Chun turned to Jake. Master Chief Thompson, your statement corroborates what we've heard from other witnesses. However, I need to address the fact that you used physical force against a flag officer. Can you walk me through your decision-making process? Jake had been through enough debriefings and investigations to know how to present his actions clearly and logically. Ma'am, I assessed the situation as follows. Admiral Blackwood had already committed assault by striking Mrs. Martinez. He was making threats about continuing to retaliate against her and her husband. Based on his behavior and level of intoxication, I believed he posed a continued threat to Mrs. Martinez and potentially other women at the event. The agent made notes as Jake continued. I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize that threat. I applied pressure to a nerve point to gain compliance, and I released him as soon as he agreed to apologize and leave. At no point did I strike him or cause any permanent injury. Agent Chen nodded. Your military record shows extensive training in close-quarters combat and hostage rescue scenarios. In those contexts, you're trained to make split-second decisions about the appropriate use of force, correct? Yes, ma'am. We're taught to assess threats quickly and respond with proportional force to protect innocent people. That's exactly what I did tonight. As the interviews continued, word of the incident was already spreading through military social media and news outlets. Videos of the confrontation were being shared thousands of times, with most viewers expressing support for Jake's actions and disgust at Admiral Blackwood's behavior. Sarah's courage in standing up to a powerful abuser was being praised by military spouses around the world, many of whom shared their own stories of harassment and abuse by senior officers. The incident was becoming a rallying point for those who believed the military needed to do more to protect its people from predators within its own ranks. By the end of the evening, Admiral Blackwood was in custody awaiting formal charges. Jake was free to return to his duties pending the completion of the investigation, and Sarah had made the decision to pursue both military and civilian criminal charges against her attacker. The charity gala, despite the traumatic interruption, had raised more money than ever before as attendees made additional donations to show their support for military families and their appreciation for Jake's heroic actions. Sarah's volunteer work was being recognized not just locally, but nationally, as news outlets picked up the story of the military spouse who refused to be intimidated by a corrupt admiral. As Jake prepared to leave the hotel, Sarah approached him one final time. The bruise on her cheek was darker now, but her eyes were clear and determined. Master Chief Thompson, she said, I want you to know that what you did tonight changed my life. Not just because you protected me, but because you show me that there are still good people in uniform who will stand up for what's right, regardless of the consequences. Jake's typical response would have been to downplay his actions, to say he was just doing his job. But looking at this brave woman who had endured assault and harassment with such dignity, he realized that sometimes people needed to hear that their courage mattered. "Mrs. Martinez, you're the one who showed real courage tonight. You could have given in to his demands to protect your husband's career, but you chose to do what was right instead. That's the kind of integrity that makes the military stronger." 3 months after the incident at the Grand Meridian Hotel, the consequences were still unfolding across the military community. Admiral Richard Blackwood faced a general court-martial on charges of assault, sexual harassment, conduct unbecoming an officer, and abuse of authority. The evidence against him was overwhelming, with dozens of witnesses' video footage and a pattern of similar behavior that investigators uncovered during their comprehensive investigation. Sarah Martinez had become an unlikely symbol of courage for military spouses everywhere. Her decision to press charges and testify against Admiral Blackwood had inspired dozens of other women to come forward with their own stories of harassment and abuse by senior officers. The military was being forced to confront the reality that predators had been protected by rank and privilege for far too long. The courtroom was packed on the day of Admiral Blackwood's sentencing. Military and civilian reporters filled the gallery, along with military spouses, active duty personnel, and supporters who had followed the case closely. Sarah sat in the front row, her husband David beside her after returning early from deployment to support her through the legal proceedings. Lieutenant Commander David Martinez had been furious when he learned what had happened to his wife, but he was also incredibly proud of her courage in fighting back against corruption. His commanding officer had made it clear that there would be no retaliation against his career, and several senior officers had privately commended him for his wife's bravery. Jake Thompson sat a few rows behind Sarah, wearing his dress blues and looking every inch the decorated Navy SEAL that he was. The investigation into his actions had concluded quickly, with investigators determining that his use of force was justified and appropriate given the circumstances. Far from being punished, Jake had been commended by the Chief of Naval Operations for his courage in protecting a military spouse. The military prosecutor, Commander Angela Foster, presented a devastating case against Admiral Blackwood. She detailed not just the assault on Sarah, but also a pattern of sexual harassment and abuse of power that investigators had uncovered. 3 other military spouses had come forward with similar experiences, and several junior officers testified about inappropriate comments and behavior they had witnessed but been afraid to report. "Your Honor," Commander Foster said during her closing argument, "Admiral Blackwood used his position of authority to prey upon the wives of junior officers, knowing that they would be afraid to report his behavior for fear of retaliation against their husbands' careers. This case represents not just one incident of assault, but a systematic abuse of power that undermines the core values of our military." Admiral Blackwood's defense attorney tried to portray the incident as a misunderstanding exacerbated by alcohol, but the evidence was too strong and the pattern too clear. The retired admiral sat at the defense table looking haggard and defeated, a shadow of the imposing figure he had once been. When it came time for victim impact statements, Sarah stood up to address the court. Her voice was steady and clear as she spoke about the lasting effects of the assault and harassment. "Your Honor, what Admiral Blackwood did to me was more than just a physical assault. He tried to use his power to coerce me into betraying my marriage and my values. He threatened to destroy my husband's career because I refused to submit to his advances. His actions represented everything that is wrong with unchecked authority and privilege." She paused, looking directly at Admiral Blackwood, who couldn't meet her eyes. "But I want this court to know that I don't speak just for myself today. I speak for every military spouse who has been harassed, threatened, or assaulted by those who were supposed to protect them. Your sentence today will send a message about whether the military truly believes in justice and accountability." Jake was also called to give a statement, though his was brief and to the point. "Your Honor, I took an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Admiral Blackwood became a domestic enemy when he used his position to prey upon innocent people. I would take the same action again without hesitation. The military judge, a stern woman with 30 years of experience in military law, delivered her verdict with the gravity the case deserved. Admiral Blackwood, you have been found guilty of assault, sexual harassment, conduct unbecoming an officer, and abuse of authority. These crimes are particularly heinous because they were committed by someone in a position of trust and authority. She continued, her voice echoing through the silent courtroom. You have brought disgrace upon a uniform you wore for 30 years and betrayed the trust placed in you by the men and women under your command. Military leadership is a sacred responsibility, and you violated that responsibility in the most fundamental way possible. Admiral Blackwood was sentenced to 5 years in military prison, reduction in rank to the lowest enlisted grade, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and dismissal from the service. He would also have to register as a sex offender and would lose all military benefits, including his pension. As the sentence was read, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication. Justice had been served, but she knew the fight was far from over. The military still had work to do in changing its culture and protecting vulnerable members from predators within its ranks. After the sentencing, a crowd of supporters gathered outside the courthouse. Military spouses, active duty personnel, and civilian advocates all wanted to thank Sarah for her courage and Jake for his intervention. The incident had sparked a broader conversation about sexual harassment in the military and had led to new training programs and reporting procedures. Captain Rodriguez, who had been promoted to Admiral following his exemplary handling of the incident, approached Sarah and Jake. I want you both to know that the Navy is committed to ensuring that what happened that night never happens again. We're implementing new policies for reporting harassment and abuse, and we're making it clear that rank will never protect predators. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of closure that had been months in coming. Admiral Rodriguez, I hope our experience can help prevent other families from going through what we went through. Military spouses deserve better than to be seen as targets by those who are supposed to protect them. Jake had been remarkably humble throughout the aftermath of the incident, consistently deflecting praise and focusing on Sarah's courage. But Sarah wanted to make sure his actions were properly recognized. Master Chief Thompson, she said, I know you don't like being called a hero, but that's exactly what you are. You saw something wrong happening, and you acted, even though it could have cost you your career. That's the kind of courage that makes our military strong. The three of them posed for pictures with other supporters, and Jake couldn't help but smile at how the evening had brought together people from all walks of military life. Senior officers, enlisted personnel, spouses, and civilians had all united around the simple principle that right should triumph over might. As the crowd began to disperse, Sarah's husband David approached Jake. The two men had met several times during the legal proceedings, and David wanted to express his gratitude personally. Master Chief, David said, extending his hand, I can never adequately thank you for what you did for Sarah that night. You protected my wife when I couldn't be there to do it myself, and you gave her the courage to fight back against injustice. Jake shook his hand firmly. Sir, your wife's courage is what made the difference. I just made sure she had the chance to use it. The incident at the Grand Meridian Hotel had changed all of their lives in profound ways. Sarah had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed and had become an advocate for military spouses facing harassment and abuse. Jake had been reminded why he chose to serve and had seen firsthand the impact that one person's courage could have on an entire community. 6 months later, Sarah was invited to speak at military spouse conferences around the country, sharing her story and encouraging other women to report harassment and abuse. Her volunteer work had evolved into a nonprofit organization dedicated to supporting military families facing crisis situations. Jake returned to his duties with his SEAL team, but he also began working with Navy leadership to develop new training programs focused on bystander intervention and the responsibilities of military personnel to protect each other from abuse. Admiral Blackwood served his sentence in disgrace, a fallen officer who had lost everything because he couldn't control his worst impulses. His case became a cautionary tale taught in military leadership schools about the consequences of abusing power and betraying trust. The charity gala where it all began became an annual event that grew larger each year, with proceeds supporting not just military families in financial need, but also organizations working to combat sexual harassment and assault in the military community. Sarah continued to organize the event, though now she had a team of volunteers and the support of senior military leadership. On the first anniversary of the incident, Jake and Sarah met for coffee near the base. They had become friends through their shared experience, and both had been forever changed by that night at the hotel. "Do you ever regret getting involved?" Sarah asked, stirring sugar into her coffee. "Your life would certainly be simpler if you had just looked the other way." Jake considered the question seriously. "Mrs. Martinez, I've spent my career in situations where split-second decisions can mean the difference between life and death. That night, I saw someone who needed help, and I acted. I can't imagine living with myself if I had done anything else." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. "I used to think that making waves would only hurt David's career and our family. But I learned that sometimes standing up for what's right is the only choice we really have." As they sat there, both of them recognized that the incident that had brought them together had become something larger than either of them had anticipated. It had sparked conversations, changed policies, and inspired others to speak out against injustice. The Admiral who had thought his rank protected him from consequences had learned otherwise. The SEAL who had acted on instinct to protect the innocent had been vindicated. And the military spouse who had refused to be intimidated had become a voice for others who had suffered in silence. Their story would be remembered not just as an incident of assault and intervention, but as a moment when the military community chose to confront its problems honestly and work toward being worthy of the trust placed in it by those who serve and their families.